I'm sorry, we've got the member for Southern River on his feet.
Yeah, Madam Acting Speaker, as we want to get this bill through today, I'll keep my comments very brief. As I've said in this place many times before, I have a large number of taxi drivers in my electorate, and I've had meetings with taxi drivers going back to 2009 during the boom time, so it's not a more recent interest in the taxi industry. And they came to see me at the time because they wanted to be able to buy their lease plates. And I actually argued with the drivers saying, I don't believe that that's a good way to go, because when there is going to be a downturn, which inevitably will come, it's going to be important that the government can actually pull out lease plates out of the market to be able to match the supply with demand. And I'm pleased to be able to say that I understand the Minister may be able to comment on that in his contribution, but I think something like 20% of the lease plates have actually been withdrawn out of the market, which has helped to lessen the impact of the downturn and the arrival of Uber at the same time. In my meetings with taxi drivers prior to the arrival of Uber, there were many complaints from taxi drivers about the conduct of Swan Taxis, the dispatch services, their frustration in wanting to provide a good service to the community, and the dispatch service really standing in the way of that. I don't have time to go into the details of that, but many of the drivers will know, in the gallery will know exactly what I'm talking about. The issue that's been raised that the government did absolutely nothing, I don't think is quite true. The government did initiate prosecutions of Uber drivers. I'm not quite sure where those prosecutions are up to now, but again, the Minister may comment on that. But I certainly appreciate the financial stress that those drivers in my electorate and elsewhere for that matter are under, who have purchased their plates of more recent years. Like the member for Gosnells mentioned, the family that had bought 6 plates. When he mentioned that, the husband's got 3, the wife's got 3, I just shut up. Who gave them financial advice? If I was going to invest 1.2 to $1.6 million, I would seek some financial advice. I would never put all of my eggs into one basket. So I think so.
Member,
I'm not asking for interjections.
Member for Armidale.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate the fact that people have purchased a taxi plate for a view to having the right to drive taxis for as long as they wish, and that's a licence to do that. But I think it's really important to remember that a government regulation of an industry does not guarantee the capital value of the licence. There's another example that I know of. My daughter's a pharmacist. In the pharmacy industry, the value of a licence that you need to have to operate a pharmacy has absolutely plummeted. Pharmacists are actually physically handing in their licences and shutting their shops because that licence that they purchased a few years ago has become valueless because of the changes the government's made to the PBS and the way they fund things. So we just need to keep that in mind. The member for Willagee mentioned yesterday that all industries have their downtime, down cycles, ups and downs, and the taxi industry is no different. And the taxi drivers I've talked to acknowledge that that is something that they accept. They're in an industry that's part and parcel of it. But I think the difficulty that's arisen is the fact that with the arrival of Uber and now moving to deregulated situation, we are facing a double whammy, if you like, for the drivers. But it's interesting that some of the drivers in my electorate that have spoken with me are actually still doing quite well. I've got one taxi driver who does wheelchair taxi work, and he's a lovely, gentle guy, and he actually tells me that he virtually takes 1 or 2 jobs a week off the dispatch service. He gives the disabled people his business card, mobile phone number, and he basically is booked up all week with private jobs. That's what he does, and he does it well. And that was already back in 2009 that he was telling me that. and he's still fully booked. So in many ways, the value of his licence to himself has not depreciated one little bit because he's built up a business, if you like, a micro business for himself. Recently, I recently was out in Gosnells doing a bit of door knocking, and I came across a gentleman who had a taxi in his driveway, and I said, "Hey, you must be doing it tough at the moment." And he was an Iranian migrant, and he said, "I've been driving taxis for," I think he said 5 or 6 years, whatever it is. And he said, "No," he said, I've got my licence, it's down, true, but I'm still earning enough to make a living." And I said, "So how's that working for you?" And he told me, he said, "I give people my business card and my mobile phone number, so I get a lot of private jobs." And he said, "That's been able to keep me going." He said, "I provide a good service," and that he's been able to develop his own clientele base. Now, I appreciate that people who've entered the industry more recently, that is not, they haven't had a chance to develop that, and therefore that's something that it makes it more difficult for them to keep going. But so those who depend on the dispatch services, they're certainly the ones that are struggling the most. And I accept that the hail and rank work, which has been reserved for the taxi industry, is in some ways not as big a part of the market anymore, because by virtue of the apps that Uber has, a person can call a taxi and it comes to where they are, an Uber rather, to where they are, which is, in a sense, the apps make it a mobile rank in effect. So it'll be interesting to see just to what extent rank and hail work actually continues to make up whether it will continue to make up 40% of the taxi work. One of the things that I also want to mention is, the other day I was back towards the end of July, I caught a taxi from the airport and I chatted with the driver and I said, "Things are pretty tough at the moment, aren't they?" And he said, "I don't know what's happened." He said, "But the last 2 weeks, it's really picked up." And I said, "Oh, but why is that?" And I said, do you think there's less Uber drivers on the road?" And he said, "I don't know. But remember, on the 4th of July, the regulations changed, which required Uber drivers to be licensed and basically to front up with about $800 with upfront costs, because they were now obligated to have the insurance, the extra registration costs, etc. And I actually received a letter from Jessica Lufstedt, the Manager of Public Policy and Government Relations from Uber, in May 2016, and she actually wrote in this letter to, and I think others, MPs probably got it as well, she said that 80% of Uber drivers have declared they would not drive if they've got upfront costs of $500. Well, now they're facing $800 upfront cost, and my guess is that as time goes on, the number of Uber drivers will actually diminish considerably, because the upfront cost is something that should have been there earlier, and I accept that from taxi drivers that we've taken an awfully long time to get that in place. That should have been done more quickly, I accept that. But I think part of the reason for the delay in getting this bill before this House has been the fact that some of us on the backbench have been arguing very strongly that there should be something like a $1 levy per ride to provide some kind of compensation or further compensation for the taxi industry. And I know the Minister's been working on that with the department, and that's delayed the entry of this bill. But as I've frequently said, why don't we get this bill into the House, get the $20,000 available to all taxi plate owners, and for those that are struggling to pay their bank loans, a $20,000 grant would certainly, for most, that's roughly sort of 10 months, or depending on how much they still owe, but say for most it would be somewhere between 6 and 12 months of their bank repayment. So that gives them the opportunity to have a little bit of a break and get the bank off their back if that's happening at the moment for them, so it gives them a chance to get organised. And then, of course, there's also the hardship fund for which people can apply, and that's particularly, I think, necessary for those who purchased their plates of more recent years. And the reality is that I don't think anybody can actually predict what the value will be of a taxi plate in 2 years' time. I'm not sure any of us can actually predict that at this point in time. So the question is, how do we move forward from here? I believe that this bill, which provides the $20,000 grant to every plate holder, is a very worthwhile measure that is going to help everyone. Some perhaps might, like my friend who does the wheelchair taxi business, it's going to be a very welcome $20,000 that he doesn't really need because his business hasn't actually fallen. But for many, it will be very, very welcome. And once this is in place and people who have hardship issues apply for the fund, and I think the $6 million may perhaps prove not to be sufficient, but again, that's something that can be addressed if we do run out of funds on that score. So I believe that the taxi industry is very much in a state of transition, and I believe that within the taxi industry there is real potential for those who take the initiative to develop a private clientele, or perhaps even for people who group together and have a taxi, it's like a cooperative, because they can operate their own dispatch service, their own branding, if you like, and in a sense carve out a niche market for themselves, whether it be a taxi service where, say, all women drivers, for argument's sake, that, say, women might feel more comfortable catching a taxi knowing they're going to have a woman driver, that type of thing. I think there's real opportunities in the marketplace to carve out a niche market. But in the meantime, and given the current downturn in the economy, there's obviously less demand for taxis. I think we're going to see some more decline in the number of Uber drivers, because one of the drivers that came in to see me, that's the Uber drivers I should say, he was getting very concerned because he said, when I actually do the sums, I'm earning about $5 an hour, because once I take depreciation of my vehicle into account, the extra insurance I need, etc., he said, I'm not really making much money. He felt quite exploited and was planning to get out of it. And my guess is, and I could be proved wrong, but I believe that Uber will actually decline in the number of drivers they have on the road, and hopefully the economy will pick up. As that picks up, I believe that the taxi industry does have a bright future, but I do fully support the fact that there needs to be some hardship provisions and not hardship funding available to those that are in serious need. Because as the member for Mandurah said, we're dealing with families. We have real people involved. It's not just about facts and figures, but we're dealing with people. And so I believe that every plate owner getting $20,000 is going to be a very welcome relief for those owners and drivers if they're driving. And for those who are lease plate holders, the licence plate has already from 13,000 gone down to per year down to 1,200, I think it is, a year. So for them, there's been a major improvement already in their financial situations. For the plate owners, they're the ones who are, if you like, the ones that are suffering at the moment. And I believe that this $20,000 grant available to everyone who is a plate owner will be very welcome, very helpful, and for those who are in real financial crisis, the special needs hardship fund will be very, very helpful as well. And as time progresses, there's opportunity still for further action to be taken by the government once we see how things settle down.
Madam Acting Speaker.
Member for Hillary East.
Madam Acting Speaker, the member for Southern Rivers, he followed my speech the other day, which